as a novelist, Merle Temple draws from his experiences as an agent and the first captain for the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics. In the initial war on drugs in the 1970s, he was a manager in the corporate world and a campaign chairman in a high-level politics. He witnessed firsthand the world of politics, crime, and business, which he now refers to as the unholy Trinity. Now, this morning on SuperTalk Meridian 103.3, looking back, we'll find out why as we look back at the life of Merle Temple and his journey into the darkness and back into the light. I'm your host today, Rochelle Putnam. Don't go away. We'll be right back with Merle Temple. Now, here is an excerpt from A Rented World, written by Merle Temple, who's in the studio with us today. He had spent years seeking some elusive simplicity, even as he constructed his own complex and artificial existence, one that revolved around Michael Parker. Good morning, Merle. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I love that bumper music.
Oh, yeah. We got some great music for you today.
I think I knew those guys.
Now, Michael Parker, of course, we're going to talk about your life, but we're, in essence, talking a lot about Michael Parker's life, who is the main character in A Ghostly Shade of Pale, A Rented World, The Redeemed, and then the upcoming book that you're working on now, The Deputy. So tell us just a little bit about your early life before this Michael Parker and Merle Temple that we know today. Before those years of getting into, where were you born? Were you reared in Mississippi?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I grew up in a little community called Temple Grove, named after my
named after you.
No, it's Parker Grove in the book.
Okay.
And Ghostly Shade of Pale, but
yeah.
it was just outside of Nettleton, Mississippi, and
okay.
You know, raised in the country. I went to school at Nettleton, but roamed the hills and hollows. You know, it was a different time then. When I was out in Hollywood a few years ago, I had to really work hard to explain to them, you know, how it really was in those days, not maybe how they had seen it depicted in movies.
Yes.
But, you know, we're just good people, neighbors helping neighbors. We fished, we hunted, we raised our own crops, and Mother and Daddy worked and trying to make a living for us. And my grandmother, Pearl, who I keep her real name in the books, lived with us, and I promised her 50-something years ago that I would never forget her. She was my buddy and my confidant, and she was my earliest role model for the unconditional love that I would find in Christ later.
Oh, wow. There's nothing like a Southern grandmother. Now, all right, now that life sounds very simplistic, very Southern. So what drew you to the life that you ended up in as an agent, into all these scary places you went into?
Well, you know, in those days on TV especially, we finally got TV out there in the hinterlands. Had one of those antennas, you know, it was one of those days where you got like one or two TV stations, and I was the one always sent outside in the rain and everything to turn turn it this way, no, back a little that way, and then hold it right there.
I remember those days.
But you know, it was all you know, the heroes then were straight down the line. You know, good versus evil, and so all of my early role models, you know, were like Superman and Elliot Ness and the Untouchables.
Oh yeah,
and you know, and on and on and on, and FBI with Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., which inspired me to go to the FBI in Washington right after high school. So I wanted to be like my heroes, and my heroes in the books that I read, and I wanted to slay dragons and rescue a damsel in distress.
And you did. You were held hostage by drug dealers. The Dixie Mafia had put a contract out on your life. When you were captured, you watched your captors swallow double-edged razors, and then also do fire to tell us about that. That was just the weirdest, strangest, but coolest thing. And that had to have been just so scary to see people like this who had control of you at that moment of what they were able and capable of doing. Tell us about that experience.
Well, when I came out of Ole Miss and went into the first drug wars that President Nixon had declared, that created the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics along with the DEA, and went into that thinking I understood the world, and the world was a very neat and ordered place, and found out I didn't really know anything. And there weren't many of us, so in those days, so early on, we worked solo undercover. And I was working solo undercover in South Mississippi, and a deal we had with some heroin dealers kind of went wrong. They showed up a day early, and I was unarmed at that time. A gun was hidden in my car, and they just demanded to do it that night. And we drove out to where the highway ended, and then the blacktop ended, and then the dirt road ended, and then bumped along this little cow path out through the woods, and the limbs of the trees reaching down like long arms, scraping the roof of the car, and animals moving in the shadows around midnight. And we broke out in this clearing out there, and there was this old wood frame house built on stilts, and it looked like a scene out of every bad B-horror movie you've ever seen. I expected Freddy to jump out with his chainsaw. And we walked in, and when we did, they pulled a shotgun and a pistol out and put the pistol to my forehead and a shotgun in my stomach, and they had just decided to kill me and keep their wares and take my money, and they'd be ahead of the game, they thought. And so that began a long night, and sat across from the one held a pistol on me from the side, and I sat right across, like me to you. And that guy had just gotten out of Angola prison, which in those days, Angola was the toughest, hardest prison in the United States. If you could live through time there, it was something. And he produced a double-edged razor blade. Eyes never left mine, and he put it in his mouth. He bit on it and twisted it and chewed on it. And then he swallowed it and it went down his throat. And those things are just cut the end of your finger off.
Oh, my goodness.
For your listeners who remember, old enough like I am, remember you dropped those in the razor. And when he grinned at me, the blood gushed out, bubbled up at each corner of his mouth and ran down on his throat and oozed between his teeth. And he put his fingers up in his mouth with a handful of blood and said, "Want some?" I said, "I don't believe I'd care for Eddie." And then he pulled out a whole box of long stem kitchen matches and lit those. And they had that big flame going, and there after midnight, and in this dimly lit place, 1,000 miles from nowhere, as one song says, and nobody knows where I am, and no one's coming to rescue me. And he swallows that whole flame with the blood and everything. That's when my whole life flashed before my eyes, and I saw myself as a toddler with my parents, things buried in my subconscious I couldn't recall. And I told people later, I said, really, it was a quite beautiful experience, but I wouldn't recommend the stimulus that it took to get there.
I mean, it was like you knew that you were going to die, and your life is flashing before your eyes. Now, you're married are you married to your first wife, Susan, at this time? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, as I told you, we had Charlie Spillers on the show last week, and I had asked him this question about how the work affected family life when your loved ones know the type of danger that you're going to be in. Were you able to have a family life with the life that you had to lead as an agent?
Susan and I were real lucky. We were committed to each other, and we didn't have children at that time. I think it's tougher when you have children at home and the wife is left to take care of everything while the agent's gone deep undercover. But I did see a lot of divorces and from my peers, and and some issues that they were having, and it's to be expected because in those days, in the early days, in the Bureau, there weren't many of us, like I said, and we were just gone all the time. We worked 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. Back then we were gone all the time, and I was just really fortunate to be married to a woman like Susan, who, really was a strong lady and always supportive of everything I did. And when I could come in from the road, we would always try to do everything we could together. And she's gone now, and I'm remarried, and thankfully I found another woman, made of the same stuff.
That's awesome, because that doesn't happen all the time, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Well, we're going to go out to a short break. We're going to be right back with more Merle Temple. And we are looking back at Merle Temple's life, which is quite a journey, even just this first half hour. Now you were captain for the Mississippi Narcotics Bureau for the north half of the state. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Now, you were doing a heroin deal to draw out some of those involved in the drug realm. And when I read about that, you stated that it was the deal was set up on the coldest day of November. You talk like a writer. There was an ice storm, and everywhere it was like one sheet of ice. Now, that day is probably a day that changed your life, because something filled up your car before you went on that deal, and you changed your mind about doing something. Share that story with us.
Yeah, that's in the book, and although it's written as fiction, it's exactly how it happened. It was 40 years ago last month. Wow. How time flies. And the agents had done heroin buys from some people who were trying to create an addict population in the Golden Triangle, the Mississippi State area, the MSCW then, MUW now. And they would flood the area with high-grade heroin, create addict population, come back and cut the purity and drive up their profits. So we had made buys from them, and we were going to do one last large deal, a buy bust we called. Couldn't let that amount of money walk away, and to try to draw out any backers who might be behind them, wouldn't trust them with their product. I was in Tupelo at the office and going to the deal, which was really going to be in Columbus, and going to meet the agents in Starkville. And I ran downstairs, jumped in my car to leave, and when I cranked up and put my hand on the gear shift, Spirit just filled up my car, wrapped all around me, all through me. I was a nominal Christian in those days and had never experienced anything like that. And it was just everywhere. And spoke to me and told me to go back and get the bulletproof vest. And then it was gone. And I said, what is that? I'm losing my mind. And we didn't have a reason to believe it was a bit more dangerous than usual. And no one wore vests in those days. Everybody does now in law enforcement. No one did then. They were second chance vests, had no armor in them. They stop up to a small handgun maybe. And agents didn't like to wear them, even though it was cold, and they had coats on. They're kind of, bulky. And so I said, I don't know where that's coming from. I put my hand back on the gear shift. When I did, the Spirit filled up my car again, wrapped all around me and through me, and it wasn't optional. Go back and get the vest. I said, okay, out loud. I did. I went and met the agents, and I was very nervous about that day after that. And I finally convinced them to wear the vest, humor me, and don't ask me why. And I told them, we get in town to do the deals, keep it in town in Columbus, where we'll have buildings to hide behind so we can stay close on you on surveillance. Because I was really nervous then about something might happen. But it got away from when we went south of town out on this high road, down south of the W, and went out into the country, and it was on this high embankment, kind of a levee road, and deep depressions on either side, and a railroad ran across and intersected with the levee road, and there was a high railroad trestle in the valley there, and right where the railroad and the trestle joined into the levee road, there was a clump of pine trees, and that's where the sniper was. They had a sniper perched up there with a high-powered rifle. And we had to lay back, couldn't get too close out in the country, and they were cutting in and out on the body mics, listening to them, negotiating, and it went out, and it popped back on, and I heard it, ta-tow, tow, tow, tow. It was opening fire, and the radio erupted, agents on all sides, Merle, they're taking fire, they're under fire. The chief of intelligence and I came across the levee, caught in the crossfire, gun smoke just hanging in the frigid air, and it was a scene of horror and nightmare. And one agent had been hit 3 times. Female agent with him had shot the violator on the scene, who reached in to draw his weapon out. And it was a scene, like I said, of horror. And she got the wounded agent into the car to take him to the hospital. We finally secured the crime scene. I left it with the chief of intelligence. I went to the hospital, comforted her, walked in and arrested the violator she wounded, and then went into the ER where they had my friend who had been wounded, hit 3 times. And they were cutting his clothes off of him, and that white bulletproof vest that God had sent me back to get was now crimson, soaked in blood.
Wow.
And when I walked up, the doctor, he said, "Look at this, Merle." He said, "One round hit him in his lower extremities, one sliced through his arm, and this one hit him right in his chest, and he had his hands up in the entry wound." And he said it penetrated the vest because it wasn't designed to stop a high-powered rifle. He said, but it deflected it. And it went through the vest, but it went in behind his right breast, skidded around the barrel of his rib cage, and popped out behind his left breast. And he said, Merle, if he hadn't had that vest on and had taken out his heart and lungs, he'd have been dead before he hit the ground. And I'm telling you here today, I still get chill bumps telling the story as I always do. It's been 40 years, but you could hear the shuffle of angels' feet there around us that day.
Did you realize that that's what you were hearing at that point in your life?
Yeah, I did, but I still didn't understand it.
Yeah.
I knew I was not alone, and I knew I always felt I had the favor of God, but did not understand it at all, even though I'd been raised in a church, very nominal Christian. And so I went on my merry way after that and just really doubled down on works-based salvation, trying to be even better, slay more dragons, rescue more damsels, very naive and very idealistic. A lot of schools use my books in English classes, and I was just at one, and they had drawn characters that had them hanging from the hallways and in classrooms. What a thrill for an author. When I went in, there's Michael, who is really me, hanging up there on his arm, written down his arm. They have idealistic.
Wow. Speaking of idealistic, okay, so you were kind of sort of forced from the MNB because you were investigating a corrupt governor at that time. What year was that? Do you remember about that? The year that?
Yeah, the year that I left was 78.
Okay, and you went to Georgia.
No, first I worked in Mississippi for South Central Bell.
South Central Bell,
as a security manager.
Yes. So, I've read a lot about, and I don't even know if this was the era for that, but there was a lot of corruption in the Mississippi government, especially during the Civil Rights era and the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, Citizens Council, things like that. Did you ever come across any of that type of information, or were you ever called to investigate anything that had to do with that?
Well, we kind of brushed up against it, but that was not our calling.
Okay.
That's not what we were charged with by statute, and but we did brush up against it. We saw a lot. There were people working for state government who we knew who were wiretapping illegally people, and they were wiretapping us. You didn't go along and get along. You weren't a team player. They had 1 or 2 guys who specialized in that and procuring other things for politicians in Jackson. But they would come out and illegally tap your phones and see what you were doing, who you were going after, were you going after the wrong people, or if they could, if you weren't playing ball with them, see if there was something they could find to compromise you. But when I investigated that governor, they sent word to me and said, Merle, they're searching high and low for something and knock that halo off your head so they can come after you openly because the press likes you. And that's just still how it's done today. They have a friendly police officer who doesn't represent the majority, but he will find you out, pull you over, stop you, and thump you up the side of the head with a slapjack and pour a little whiskey on you. And then it'll be in the paper on the front page that so-and-so, well-known, was arrested for DUI. And no matter if it's dismissed, that story will be on with the obituaries. Forever.
Yeah. We're going to go out to another short break. We're going to be right back with more Merle Temple and SuperTalk Meridian. And we have Merle Temple in the studio today. And Merle, we are going looking back at his life, but we are also highlighting his books. He is a novelist, but all of his books are really recounting his life. We have A Ghostly Shade of Pale, which was the number 1 book in the series, A Rented World, The Redeemed, and the upcoming book, The Deputy. So when do you think that'll be released?
We hope to have a launch in Tupelo next month. But people can find them at Amazon and also Merle Temple. .com. If they want signed books, go there. We ship a lot of signed books really all over the country, sometimes around the world. They're people who collect books, and these novels are like novels used to be back in when I was young. They're written as literature, and they don't have any profanity. And early on, the industry looked at the manuscript for Ghostly Shade of Pale, and I said, well, this is pretty good, but you need some neon in it. And I said, how do you find neon? And they said my writing back to me was just the worst profanity you can imagine sprinkled on it, and they like graphic intimacy and all of that. And then they told me, they said, well, could you add some vampires to it? Because vampires were hot.
Oh, gosh.
Like Coffee Everything was sold with hot seller last week. And I said, no, don't think we met any certified vampires. The guy with the razor blades might come close.
Yeah.
And then I said, and you might not want to mention God. You may offend someone. I said, let me see if I understand. I said, profanity good, sex good, vampires good, but God not good. I said, no, I can't do any of that.
Yeah.
We've stuck to our guns, and consequently, that's why English teachers all around can use them. They like them, and they can use them because I didn't give in to that pressure.
Wow. Now, you have led a very challenging life in a lot of areas. You said, and as I told you, I watched a lot of your interviews and a lot of your testimonies you gave at various churches. And you said that organized crime figures were nothing compared to the political criminals that you encountered, the unholy trinity. Is that your heading? Is that copywritten by you? The unholy. I love that because that's so true with politics, business, and crime.
Yeah, I found it. The organized crime figures and Dixie Mafia and those people who tried to kill us in the old days, they were just choir boys compared to political criminals because they have the full power and resources of government to punish their enemies.
Well, I want you to tell us about your journey into that political arena and then where you ended up because of that journey, because that really, to me, is the climax of the change or the Merle Temple we know today. Would you share that with us?
Sure, yeah. Well, I was very idealistic, wanted to save the world, forgot the world already had a savior, and his name wasn't Merle. And I was President Reagan's state criminal justice chairman back in 1980. And then when we migrated to Birmingham and finally to Georgia, did well in the corporation, but also always working on the side. And I managed a political campaign there. And the incumbents didn't take it well, nor the newspaper editor who backed him. They both called me and threatened me with ruin, and threatened this lady who was running, sweet lady, break up her marriage and run her out of the state for having the audacity to even qualify to run against the incumbent. And then a newspaper editor called and told me, he said, you're going to stop this. He said, we've been very kind to you in a newspaper, and what reputation we have, we've enhanced that. We made you, and we can break you. And but I doubled down, and the lady won. Biggest upset in Georgia in 50 years, they said, and within they came after me, and politicians told my corporation that nothing would move in the legislature for them until I was punished. And I was called into Atlanta. I was a top-rated manager in that department for 12 years, but that didn't matter. And they said, right and wrong, what's that? It was only the here and now, not the hereafter. And they said, you're not God. Who do you think you are? And they told me I could never have another independent thought, but I broke my heart, and I took early retirement and a buyout, and took a political appointment as Deputy State Superintendent of Education in Georgia. Went to Atlanta to fight one last great battle, slay the dragons. I should have stayed home with my wife, who was critically ill. But she went with me. We went there, and I was a Deputy State Superintendent, and the dragons were bigger and nastier there than I'd ever encountered, and were just waiting to gobble me up. And the superintendent and the governor were having a big battle. He wanted our education money coming in from hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars coming in from Washington. And he was building kind of a shadow government, extra legal government. And we said no, and the USAID backed us up and said they would prosecute any diversion. And then one day we got a call from a friend in the White House and said, y'all are being thrown under the bus. They've cut a deal. He'll be the only governor of his party to endorse No Child Left Behind, which turned out to be the terrible bill that we knew it would be. And it was just all downhill from there. We were cut out of the loop. The Constitution didn't seem to mean much to some people anymore. We were sweeping our offices for wiretaps. I escorted another deputy, one of the other deputies, out of the building because he had gone over to the dark side. And there were secret meetings held by certain judges to manipulate the constitutional debt limit. We'd find out about it. We'd call one or two journalists who hadn't been bought out, and it was just, these people just can't imagine. It's like a movie, but it was real, a dark movie. And that's what we warn people about in the books, that this is a dark and dangerous world that we live in. To paraphrase Thoreau, all it takes, to lose yourself is to be turned around once with your eyes shut and with your conscience muted, and you're lost. And I know people, I've seen them do it, and some, they spend the rest of their lives trying to find their way back, and some never do. And so we were fighting them, and out of all of that, the superintendent was issuing contracts, trying to keep money away from the people who were diverting the money. And one of the contractors gave money back to her campaign, and after she lost running against the governor, the FBI showed up at my door one night to tell me we'd been indicted.
Wow.
They counted that as federal money. They were suddenly worried about federal money after all the millions that were being diverted, and but it was all political. And one of the dangers of having a huge central government and a lot of laws is they selectively apply those when it suits them to go against their political enemies. And so many horror stories I could tell you, but I wound up because I told the superintendent if she went to trial, I would tell the truth on the stand, and they didn't like that. They locked me up, so I couldn't testify, and broke the plea agreement and made an example of me. And the last of the Boy Scouts, everybody said, was I was sent to federal prison with an 8-year sentence.
Yeah.
Unthinkable, leaving my wife. I'd been her caregiver for 30 years. She'd been very sick. And that was a hard, hard thing. But I went in, and but out of that, so many good things happened. We formed, by the grace of God, we formed what we think is the most successful inmate-led Christian ministry in the history of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And the first place I was at, they just invited me to come back. They said, what you started for the Lord almost 10 years ago endures, bigger and better than ever. The services are in Spanish and English now, and on and on and on. And out of that, the books came, and I was broken, and I finally got it.
You said in an earlier interview that it was in prison that God turned off the noise of the world and said to you through that megaphone of pain, I love the way you talk, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? And then it was through that journey that you allowed your will to yield to his will. And you also said you learned that to surrender was to win, and to die to self was to live eternally. What does that mean?
Well, I had to learn to, first of all, start begging him for relief. Mm-hmm. You know, I was a baby Christian, and I was taking baby steps, and finally, when things changed, when I prayed a prayer that I prayed and I could mean it, and said, Lord, just show me your threads of good and purpose woven into these crushing blankets of pain, that I might understand and become a better servant of Jesus Christ. And that's when I died to self and lived to serve Christ. And I told someone the other day, I said, when I die and leave this world, I hope they write that under a cause of death, they just write he was just all used up for Jesus Christ.
Wow. We're going to go out to just another short break. We're going to be right back with more of the life of Merle Temple. So good to have you today, Merle. Merle and I met it's been a couple of years, I think, at a book signing in Tupelo, Mississippi, your hometown. Now, through some of my just kind of digging into your life, I know that one of the hardest days for you was having to leave your wife because she had been so sick. And then when you were serving time, Susan passed away, and you were not able to go to her funeral. And that just adds another level of pain in your life. I know that, you know, as a Christian and someone who has just this ultimate faith, you can just, though pain is still pain, how did you deal with all this trauma while clinging to your faith?
Well, it was crushing and beyond anything that I could really adequately describe. But after she passed away, I was lying in my bunk feeling pretty sorry for myself and curled into a fetal position. We had little earbuds, little radios. And on a good day at that place, we could get a distant Christian station. Couldn't get anything that day but roaring static. But I didn't care. It was blotting out that reality. And I was lying there, and all of a sudden the transmission broke and went crystal clear. And this voice I had never heard and before, never heard again, and I'd heard all of them on that station, said, "You there. You there." And it was so direct, it startled me. I sat up in bed, and he said, "Yes, I'm talking to you. It's not noble what you're doing, lying there wallowing in your bed of pity. Now you get up from there and you get about your Father's business."
Wow.
And then it was gone, and I did. And that's when we formed the Christian movie ministry, and it was the biggest thing on the compound. We had standing room only, and you'd hear these big, tough men weeping in the dark. And those movies, they understood that medium of movies, and their hearts were being softened to the approach of Christ. And we're in a process now of seating our books in every federal prison in the United States.
That is so awesome. This hour has gone by so fast, but I do want to ask you this last question before we have to go out of the show. You said that this corruption that you encountered throughout your life is just the way of the world. Can you ever forgive the people who helped to destroy parts of your life and took from you not only your wife's final hours, but probably a lot of your reputation along with that? As a Christian, I know that we are called to forgive, but that's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah.
Have you been able to?
Christ took all bitterness and anger and from me, and that stuff about believe your enemies and 70 times 7, he meant that, and I try to follow that. And he showed me, if you want to serve me, no junk in your trunk. Wow. You got to nail it to the cross and leave it there. I did once or twice, and I snuck back and took it down. But he said, you got to leave it there, and I did. And I had a lady write me from Birmingham the other day and said, I know your story, but my husband has been very mistreated. It was a political case, and he's in prison. And I just can't forgive. I can't get past it, and I see you running around full of joy and love, and I don't get it. Yeah. And I told her that junk in the truck story, and I said, one day you'll forgive too when you're ready. And I said, when you do, it'll be like being set free from the biggest prison you can imagine. They'll no longer have any hold over you anymore, and they won't be between you and Jesus anymore either. Well,
we thank you so much. That's such an incredible testimony. You can get Merle's books at your website, which is merletemple.com.
Yeah, MERLETEMPLE.com.
Okay. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. We want to thank you for listening today to SuperTalk Meridian.